Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I am your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome an accomplished entrepreneur from the world of food from Bangalore, India, Rinka Banerjee. Rinka, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ashutosh, for having me over here.
Thank you. Rinka is the founder and director of Thinking Forks Consulting and the co-founder of Tasty Tales. So Rinka, let me ask you my first question. Tell me about your journey that led you to establish Thinking Forks Consulting.
Great. Thanks, Ashutosh. And so I'll tell you, my journey actually started, interestingly, from my childhood. My father, a chemical engineer, working with the National Dairy Development Board, and he set up lots of dairies across the country. And I went around watching him set up dairies and things like that. So that was my starting point in terms of my inspiration, being a lot more purpose-driven. I think that was my first inspiration. I then went on to do my bachelor's in dairy technology, then went to the US, did my master's in food science. And interestingly there, this was in the early 90s, and I worked on products which is from like biodegradable packaging films made from milk proteins, which was interesting at that time. Went on to work there for a couple of years, did work for a similar company like I have today in the US at that time, working with brands like Haagen-Dazs, Slim Fast. Cut to moving back to India in 97, and I started working with Unilever. And I can tell you that was probably my most incredible journey that I've had. 16 years over there. The last 5, I was heading R&D for them for South Asia. Working very closely with the food business in Unilever gave me loads of experiences. And then in 2013 is when I started to see the idea of setting up in this part of the world, external R&D kind of an infrastructure, which could support many different kinds of companies, support different kinds of problem statements. So that's been my journey in terms of setting up Thinking Forks.
Amazing. And what was the initial vision for setting up Thinking Forks, and how has this evolved?
Right. So I think, initially when I started off the company, I think the thought process was that I had learned a lot in about 20 years of working in this field. One thing was, of course, I wanted to transfer those learnings to, not all companies have access to high quality R&D and stuff like that. So that was my first purpose, I would say, more than the vision. And then, of course, it was to be a growth enabler in the food industry. I think that was one of our key objectives at that point. And I think we've been fairly successful, I would say, in accomplishing that objective and that vision. But, along the journey, we've kind of been evolving, our thought process and vision around what the future is really looking at. And I'll be happy to talk about that. But yeah, when we started off, it was more about really being a growth enabler.
And Rinka, when you talk of success in R&D that you've just spoken about, can you give me an example of what does success look like?
So in the services that we've been doing now, over 10 years, Ashutosh, I think, I would say we've launched about 200 plus products in the market in India and across the globe. And we did some very quick back of the envelope calculations to say how much will this mean in terms of revenue generation for the industry, right? And the number was quite mind-boggling. I mean, we said it's about $500 million worth of revenues that we actually were able to help generate through innovation in the market. The second big thing I would say is, and this is probably more for the startups, a lot of the products that we launched for them, like 40, 50 products, which would be probably the first time in the market. So if I was looking at a 20-gram protein bar, or I'm looking at a meat-based spreads, or, it was healthy snacking like non-fried potato chips. We did some interesting stuff around coconut water, which was infused with Ayurveda. So a lot of those kind of products that came out first time in the market disrupted the market spaces, which was very interesting. And that's why you see today, I'm sure, if you walk around the aisles in the market, you'll see tons of new products that are coming out there, right? And so that's, I think, and I'm excited that we've been part of that journey. So that's been interesting. The other thing is, of course, for a lot of our clients, we've been able to file patents. So we've been able to do about 9 patents. 2 of them are, of course, 2 patents that we filed for ourselves, stuff like that. A lot of the larger global companies came to us saying, about really bringing cost efficiencies in their, large companies. And we were able to generate ideas worth almost $15 million to actually, give out to those companies. So yeah, so there's a lot of that in terms of success. Today, success is also not just beyond, business impact, I think I personally feel quite excited about the fact that we've been able to nurture talent, Ashutosh. It's about really saying, we've been able to create some great food scientists, etc. And India has got amazing quality talent, right?
Right.
It's about being able to nurture them. We've had many, many people who've interned with us doing well in life today. So I'm quite happy that we've been able to create that platform. So for me, success is, business impact, but equally at the same time, nurturing the right kind of talent that we've been able to do.
Fascinating, fascinating. And when I was reading about you and preparing for my conversation, I was fascinated with this phrase concept to commercialization.
Right.
Can you give me an example of, and if it's confidential, just say it's not possible. But if there's an example where you've actually taken a product from concept to commercialization.
So, I mean, a lot of products are there. I mean, so there are multiple examples, but, they've been, for example, I'll give you one example, which was an interesting case study that we had for a company which was not into FMCG at all. They were into a retail kind of business, etc. And they came to us saying, we want to launch something in the space of snacking, but it has to be disruptive. It has to be different from the market, etc. We actually were able to strategize with them, look at what the opportunities are, where the differences are, etc. Do some very quick prototyping of product concepts, get them to be, scaled up. And then what kind of claims can you make around the product? So we realized, for example, in snacking, it was largely fried snacks, right? And we eat a lot of it, right? There's namkeens and potato chips and all kinds of things. So what can you do in healthier snacking, right? So we said, can we look at traditional formats like we have a makhana or a khakra and all that stuff? Can we, spin it on its head and create innovative products out of which are genuinely healthier? They are baked, they're not fried, and all of that. And, we were able to bring them to market very quickly. In about 4 to 6 months, we had 3 products which were launched in the market, which included manufacturing, claims, packaging, looked at multiple different things. So we had multiple different work streams working at the same time. But this is just one example. And we've done plenty of those where we start from an idea. So a lot of companies, including a lot of startups, actually come to us with a very patchy idea, saying, this is what I want to do. This is where I see the opportunity. We help them articulate saying, hey, what's your right to win, right? Who's competition? How are you going to differentiate? All of that. Then bring them to that drawing board, get that brief very clear, and then start quick prototype. And look at what kind of packaging will give you, what kind of shelf life you would need, things like that, and then bring them to market very quickly. So this is just one example that you're able to do this pretty quickly and at the same time with rigor. That's important as well.
And yet, I'm sure you are confronted with this big challenge of balancing taste, health, and cost in product development. How do you handle that?
So I think it's here is where a lot of the food science knowledge, a lot of culinary knowledge that comes in. And, we've been working with a lot of flavor houses, things like that. So, for example, when we are looking at a lot of products with lower sugar, lower salt, things like that. Today, there is a lot of science that's available in terms of boosting flavors, right? So you can boost flavor, you can use flavor boosters, which are natural flavor boosters for boosting the sweetness of your product, the saltiness of your product. Doing food pairing and flavor pairing is very important. Many times we don't realize in India, a lot of the spices that we use, if you use certain spices, you use, let's say, a lemon juice, things like that, you're able to reduce the amount of salt. Now that comes from culinary understanding, so it's really about blending that food science and culinary aspects, which is why today, when you say about how have we evolved, I think we've evolved to saying our mission today is not just about being a growth enabler. It's about saying, how do we solve future food problems? So it's really about saying shaping the future of food through science and craft, because food is all about taste at the end of the day. Right? So you can get a great healthy product. And like you said, how do you balance the taste part of it? But there you use a lot of science, you use a lot of culinary understanding, and then, you are able to create, good solutions, which is low in sugar, it's lower in salt, or it's, sugar-free, things like that. But yeah, and we do work with a lot of supplier partners. So we have a lot of ecosystem partners. If you look at the flavor industry today, food ingredient industry, there's a lot of those solutions as well available.
Great response. Thank you. The other aspect, and you spoke about it a few minutes ago, is the importance of packaging. While there's a lot of new types of food coming out, and I'm a great sucker for trying out everything new that comes, especially when it comes to health or low sugar, I'd love to get your perspectives, Rinka, on the importance of packaging and what goes into developing appropriate, sustainable packaging.
Absolutely. No, yeah, I mean, I think packaging, little do we realize that packaging is your first moment of truth with a product. When you pick it up from the shelf, it's the packaging that you see and you make up your mind saying, is this good? Is this not so good? Is this high quality, not so high quality? All of that, right? That's your first moment of truth. So I think packaging is exceptionally important. Today, we're seeing this in multiple different ways that, we look at. One is, of course, providing the shelf life and the safety of the product, etc. That's its primary job to do. That's important. But from a design point of view today, I mean, if you look at, because there's so much of online selling, we do have a lot of our clients coming to us and saying, we want to have the best, unboxing experience that a consumer has when they open up a pack. I mean, many times I'm sure you would find it quite annoying when you have to open a pack with a pair of scissors, like you have to go and find the scissors. And I always believe that it's important to say, how can you get much more easy opening packs? And this is something you see in the West quite a bit, a lot better technology, etc., but which is available in India as well. I think it's just a matter of being able to get it at the right cost, at the right volumes and things like that. So there are some of those challenges, but the technologies exist in making sure that, you've got clean packaging and things like that. The other aspect of packaging, like you said, is sustainability. Absolutely right, that we need to have more options. And we do have, again, it's not like we have more monolayer packaging, which means you'll see many packaging which are with multiple laminates, like you have multiple layers, and that is not very sustainable. But if you go with a single layer, it is more sustainable. It's not necessarily that anything to do with plastic is bad. It's about the amount of layers of plastic that you're putting in, right? But the challenge with that is, of course, one is cost. Second is shelf life. What happens in India, being a tropical country, our temperatures are so high and things like that. That's the space. There's a lot of work happening today in terms of really saying, how do you manage to get a good shelf life for our kind of climates and yet maintain that sustainability? And just the last thing I'll probably add is today we're working with some very, very disruptive startups who are looking at, more sort of sources like seaweed, other kind of ingredients, where you can take some of that and convert it into packaging. So if you look at all these online packaging cutlery, a lot of that today you will start seeing with which is coming from sustainable materials, right? So it is from waste valorization, and I'll talk about that maybe, but there's a lot of that also converting into packaging as well. So it's a pretty interesting field at the moment.
Absolutely. I was seeing a video the other day someone sent me from Mexico on how they are using cactus skin to make leather bags, or to make cactus skin bags now, for example. But moving on, Rinka, how do you leverage technology and so many digital tools that are available in Thinking Fox?
Right. So I think today I'll just talk about digital tools. Some of the things that we realize that a lot of the companies today are coming to us with asking for innovation, but innovation with speed. People today, I think, don't no longer have the patience of saying, oh, I've got a long NPD cycle of like 18 months and then I will launch a product. Today, there are platforms like online, etc., where you can go, you test, you want to learn, I would say you fail fast. You learn and then you move on to the next thing, right? So it's a bit of that kind of a situation we're sitting with. So because of that, what we're doing is we're using tools like digitization and AI to actually create product development processes which can be done in a very, very quick, fast time. So for example, we're sitting on tons of data in terms of saying how to create, I'm just giving an example, like a granola bar, right? Now I can create a granola bar in multiple different ways. What we've been able to do is we've been able to digitize all of those different chassis, that are possible. So today, if somebody came to me with a protein drink or a granola bar or a powder or whatever, I'm able to then play with my chassis and be able to come up with recipes really fast. So that's one part, which is AI and, digital tools. That's one thing. The other thing is, for the last couple of years, actually, I've been thinking about this whole space of how do you make consumers and empower them to make healthier food choices, but in a simple manner.
Right.
So, regulations, of course, ask you to put down a whole bunch of content on the pack, which you have to read through. And consumers find that exceptionally confusing, right? So saying, okay, this has this E number, this ingredient, is it correct? Is it not correct? So we sort of, thought about that, and we said, why don't we create a tool which the consumer can, I mean, a brand can essentially put in their information around the safety of the product, the nutrition and the ingredients and all of that. And a consumer can just, and you generate a QR code, and a consumer just scans the QR code and is able to then transparently see what, this product is good for, right? How did it get its goodness, right? So in terms of having a very empowering tool for consumers, we just recently, and this is just a couple of weeks ago, we launched something called the Goodness Meter. It is a digital tool where we are actually talking to brands and we are getting the information that they have on the safety of their product, the ingredients that they're using, the quality of its ingredients, and quality of nutrition. If they qualify those criteria, and this is all validated by veterans in the industry. So so in terms of the credibility of it, in terms of the science credentials that has gone into creating this tool is important. And then the consumers essentially scan the QR code and they are able to see the entire stuff, in terms of the whole, very transparently. So these are the two digital tools we've done. And the last thing is around using waste to valorize waste. And that's another big technology space. Yeah.
Interesting. Wonderful. Now, my next question for you is, what are some of the regulatory challenges in the food industry? And I know FSSAI is a big one.
Yeah.
And how does your team at Thinking Fox navigate a lot of these challenges?
Yeah. So I think, first of all, FSSAI has done a brilliant job so far in terms of really raising the bar on regulations over the last several years. I think where we were maybe about 15 years ago, 10 years ago to now, we are at a much, much better place, right? Today, people are reading a lot more in terms of the labels, which is a fantastic thing. They've done a lot of food safety training and all of that stuff. I think the spaces where we will need to do a lot more of is, like I was talking about, building transparency. Transparency in the way we label our products, in the way, brands need to really look at not misleading consumers, but empowering consumers with information and let them make the choice, whether I want to go for a healthier food choice and stuff like that. But I think there is a lot more that needs to be done in that space in terms of really looking at misleading claims and how do you manage that. And this is not just large company issue or whatever, it is across the industry, I would say. I mean, suddenly putting jaggery into product doesn't make it healthy. Right. I mean, it is about saying, why, and so all of that is important. The other aspect I would say, for us to be a strong powerhouse in food industry, including global exports, etc., I think food safety, we need to move the bar. We really raise the bar to the next level in terms of food safety. So I think for me, food safety and transparency of information, claims, these are the spaces that we see is important from a regulatory perspective. And we navigate a lot of our clients to make credible claims, etc., on packs. Not just, because, and look at nutrition holistically. I mean, don't look at it as just one thing saying, oh, I've got this ingredient, but I've got tons of sugar and I've got tons of saturated fat, but I'm diabetic friendly. That does not make sense. So I think those are the kind of spaces that I would say from a regulation perspective, Ashutosh, I think we need to work.
Very well said. Very well said. So time for 3 more questions for you. What are some of the most exciting trends in the food and nutrition industry that you are most excited about or are currently focusing on?
Yeah, no, I think it's such an exciting time. And I keep telling my team, that I think we're sitting at a very, very exciting time in food in India at the moment. And across the globe, I would say. But I think some of the big trends we're seeing is, especially in urban India, I think it's a lot about, one is, of course, health and wellness. I mean, health is probably the biggest macro trend that we're seeing, where consumers are wanting to make healthier food choices, which is even in your everyday regular foods, whether it's your atta or your bread and stuff like that. Apart from that, snacking, beverages, functional products, we're seeing a lot of that as well. Whether it's women's health, whether it is, digestive health. So you see a lot of products around probiotics, things like that. So that's one space. The other space equally, and you may call it the flip side of health, but it's indulgence, right? I think in India, and especially with a lot of the Gen Z millennial consumers today, people are going out there and having a lot more experiential food kind of stuff, whether it's outside home, whether it's in home, right? It's about international cuisines. It's about desserts. I mean, you walk into a cafe, just so many out there, right?
Correct.
We've in fact seeing not just Indian desserts and mithais. And in fact, today mithais are innovating. And I don't know if you've noticed that. I mean, today you are having a tres leches barfi or sort of things like that. But you have international desserts as well, like a kunafa or different kinds of brownies and things like that. So I think consumers are getting really exposed to this. So I think that's another very, very interesting space in terms of trends. So really being able to do health and wellness on one side, but indulgence on the other side. But the other layer where I see the opportunity, and I think there's a lot more that needs to be done there, is really making nutrition a lot more affordable, right? Having a lot more affordable kind of nutrition spaces, your tier 2, tier 3 towns, while their asks are similar, it's not very different, but being able to reach at an affordable price point is going to be an important thing for us to look at. One of the things that I have seen personally is that packaging can play an interesting role. We are a country which launched tons and tons of shampoo sachets, right? We made shampoo very affordable. Now, the same thing can be done with food. Can you look at smaller packaging formats? You get your nuts and seeds and, your high quality food and indulgent food and all that. But can you do it in smaller pack sizes? One, because it makes it portion controlled. So from a health perspective, it's better. You consume less of it. It's no harm to consume some, indulgent brownie once in a while, but having less of it is fine, right? And the other thing is also to, sort of make it a lot more affordable. So, you can make indulgent premium healthy products, but make it affordable through smaller pack sizes. So these are some interesting spaces that we could see trends happening.
Very interesting. And my last question to you, Rinka. You have been recognized as amongst one of the top 15 women transforming India. I want to ask you, what impact has this recognition had on you and on thinking folks?
Great. Yeah, great question, Ashutosh. I think in 2019, I was awarded the top 15 women transforming India. And I think it was, first of all, a fantastic initiative it is still a fantastic initiative by the Niti Aayog. My experience there of meeting almost more than 100 women doing very, very different things. A lot of them were in the food space, which was very interesting. I actually met women who were having a massive amount of social impact in smaller towns and states, putting self-help groups, cultivating mushrooms and creating some, mushroom-based products out of it. Or it was about having, solar drying technologies for fruit and vegetables, which was fantastic. So, that was an amazing journey. We had panelists who asked us all the right questions. As women founders, you tend to be very passionate about what you're doing, but you may not necessarily think the business aspects of things. And it was fantastic to get, a lot of guidance and mentoring during that whole journey to say, how do you look at it from a business perspective and things like that. So that was interesting. But one thing that came out of that experience for me was also to mentor a lot more women. So I am part of the Catalyst for Women Entrepreneurs, which is based in Bangalore here. We do a lot of little mentoring sessions, and I'm very happy to work with some of them over weekends, things like that, to say, how do you get your passion, your idea, but bring it to market, which from a business point of view makes a lot of sense, right? So I think that was a huge changing thing for me to, sort of being able to help other women as well.
Well,
so that was the impact it had on me.
Fantastic, fantastic. And on that note, Rinka, I just want to say thank you so much for speaking to me about your own amazing journey. Thank you for speaking to me about thinking folks. I think I learned many new things from you on not just on food, the value of getting healthy food, but also on technology and packaging. Thank you for speaking to me again, and good luck to you.
Thank you so much, Ashutosh. Thank you for having me over. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.